I will show you the screen.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for being here. Everything seems to work, and no, not actually. I don't see my notes here, so we need to do it the other way around. It might have been, yes. Oh, we can do it this way. That's nice. That's nice too. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. No, this is not gonna work. Technical support. Thanks again. Now we are there, we are online. I hope that we are online and that everybody who is not able to be joining us here can see us and hear us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for lasting to the last presentation of the day. That's always a challenge. A big thank you to the organizers for having me. The topic of my presentation has been already mentioned. It's effects of extreme ritual on psychophysiological health. I'll be talking a little bit about our lab as been mentioned, and I'll be also talking a little bit about the background of our research, about the main concepts, main theories that drive our research. So let's dive right into it. Our lab is one of two research centers under the Department for the Religious Studies. If you didn't know, the other one being CEDRR, CEDR, is the Center for the Digital Studies of Religion. But I'm the director of Levina, which focuses on experimental research of religion. And what does that mean for us? It's a strictly naturalistic framework that we work in, and interdisciplinarity is not just an empty phrase for us. We really do work mainly collaboratively, and we believe in the power of combining expertise and methods from humanities and sciences together. Experimental in the title refers to our modus operandi. It's our main way how to get to answer our questions. So we use experimental manipulation, and on that we usually like to use behavioral measurements rather than any other measurements, as well as physiology. Religion in the title means that we focus on religious beliefs and behaviors, and we usually try to combine both experimentation in the controlled settings of the laboratory, as well as field experiments, or a little bit looser with the control there, but adding value on the ecology. We also try to, as we believe in, we also try to go outside of the general student population into a non-weird populations, as it's sometimes referred to nowadays. And we also try to do a cross-culturally relevant research, so we can infer more about the behavioral traits of the human race as we know it. I'll be talking or introducing 4 main research lines that we have in our lab. The first one is about anxiety and ritualized behavior. We are interested in questions like, why do students rub their lucky charms right before the exams more than anywhere and anyone else? And we are interested why athletes, for example, use their lucky socks for months and don't want to get rid of them if they're in a winning strike. But also we, as I mentioned, turn into a non-Western populations to study the very same questions. So questions that connect ritualized behavior to anxiogenic situations. If you want to learn more on the specific research line, I would recommend as our recent article, this one. It's from our colleagues Lang, Krátky, and Zygaladis, as they like to call him, Dimitris Xygalatas. And it's about the role of ritual behavior in anxiety reduction. So again, from the context of Marathi community in Mauritius. Second research line involves religion and intragroup cooperation. So here we focus more on the mechanisms that might be behind ritual bringing higher cooperation within our communities. So do we behave differently when there is a religious statue present, for example? Do we behave differently in the bar as opposed to a group of people in the church, for example? Or does ritual dance affect how we treat each other? Does synchrony and synchronous movement affect how we treat each other? And if it affects sense of closeness, for example, among believers? If you're interested in this, again, here I would recommend quite a new study from another colleague, Radim Chvaja, me and Martin Lang, which is on the effects of synchronous movement on the group moral hypocrisy. So basically it tries to solve the question if synchrony in any way adds to you judging less harshly moral transgressions of someone that you synchronized with as opposed to someone you didn't synchronize with, even though it's a complete stranger and you synchronize just for a few minutes. A third research line is about religion and signaling theory. And I'll be interested if you'll spot in my later presentation that the research on health actually combines nicely within this research line. This is a research line that entails questions like, why is ritual activity so formal, for example, or invariable or repetitive, but also why do rituals involve activities like scarring or subincision or circumcision? Why do we self-harm in those behaviors more than in the other types of behaviors? Here, if you're interested in that one, I would recommend a hot from the shelf of last month, this study, where we try to look at how your relative position within a social hierarchy within a community affects the type of costs that you're able to pay to actually communicate to somebody else within that community your commitment to the social groups and social conventions. Fascinating research, definitely. If any one of you is interested in the socioeconomic status and how it affects the types of costs that we are able to pay, for example, somatic costs or opportunity costs as opposed to monetary costs, then go for this study. A fourth and the last that I'll mention today is a research line involving coevolution of religion and morality. Jana already mentioned that we like to combine these two. When I refer to coevolution, I really mean that both religion and morality evolved in our sense, at least culturally evolved, and that these processes are intertwined and interlinked and have feedback loops between themselves. So we try to solve questions like, does a specific mental model of your supernatural human being in your head changes the way you treat other people? So does it change your fairness if your belief in gods that are more punitive and know more about you than if they are less punitive and know less about you, for example? Or a question that was on my mind when we were discussing the research from Czech Republic as an atheistic republic of atheists, we could call ourselves. If there is an intuitive association between immorality and atheism, and it seems that there is even within a long-term atheistic societies. But here I would recommend a big collaborative cross-cultural research on demoralizing God, impartiality, and religious parochialism across 15 societies that we were lucky to lead. We are currently 12-member team. Here are all of them. You know Jana by now, you know Terezie. You might have seen Jakub yesterday and Eva today. I think that's all that we're able to make it. But if you want to learn more, there are detailed infos on our site. So levina.cz has full English version if you're interested in details of the research interests of any and each of us, please go there. You can also find information on our publications, on up-to-date publications, on the news that carry our research. So that's one way to connect with us, and of course Facebook is the other that is only in English version, so you don't need to worry about that weird language of ours there. We are lucky to be able to try to find answers to our questions in a state-of-the-art lab that we have right here in this very building. It's a research infrastructure of the faculty, actually, Faculty of Arts. It's called an experimental humanities lab. You might have seen it on the doors and on the direction signs somewhere. It's called Hume Lab. And here we have a nice access to a controlled setting. We can use its cutting-edge machinery that tries to get into the eye tracking movement, motion capture, physiology, biofeedback, augmented reality, virtual reality, you name it. If you're interested how to build that kind of research infrastructure, please contact Eva. She's gonna surely share with you all the deep and dark things that go into it. Apart from the controlled settings, we are also lucky in the respect that we've built a long-term field station in Mauritius. It's a tropical island in Indian Ocean. I've put a little map there on the left-hand side for anyone who weren't that lucky to go there yet. I would definitely recommend it. It's a tropical island with everything that goes into tropical island, and we've chosen this field station especially for its multi-ethnic and multi-religious nature. There are mainly Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. And we've chosen it not only because we were lucky to work with Dimitris from very early on when we set up the lab from 2011, but also because it's a highly religious place. So most of our informants would tell you that they are religious, and they are usually hitting ceilings, so 100% of the population on 100% religious, which creates us another kind of problems. But that's why we went there. And for the purpose of this talk, and that's why there is this picture to remind me, is that we will turn to a Tamil Hindu community. That's what I'll be talking about in a few minutes. And why Tamils? It's because the Tamil community is the community where you can find this extraordinary human behavior on a regular basis. It's a ritual called the Velkavadi, or I'll be using it for a short as Kavadi. And it's a behavioral trait where people regularly pierce their skin, where they used prolonged physical exertion. And I'll be showing you a few examples of how this tradition looked like, just to give you a better idea. It Kavadi is a part of a longer festival. It's usually called Taipusam Kavadi or Chitirai, and the preparations are usually taking longer than 2 weeks. It's a preparation of fasting and prayer, so there is a lot going on behind the scene before it even comes to this kind of behavior. On the day of the Kavadi, and Kavadi refers to the portable altars that you can see on the right-hand side, because it means something heavy, let's say, or a burden. And on the day of the Kavadi, usually males as well as females and children gather on the side of a river, at least on these very specific occasions, or this specific site. I'm not going to be mentioning the specific names for anthropological reasons, but there are also Kavadis taking place on different parts of the island and different villages. And on the beginning of the day, males, females, and children gather on the specific different temple where they will start the procession. So they'll prepare all the piercings, they will prepare all the metallic objects that they will insert into their bodies. You can see here on the left-hand side a small boy who is being pierced through his cheeks and through his tongue. That's the least that they can do and still be pierced, let's say. Usually females are not allowed to have even this piercing, and they usually use just a covering of their mouth as a symbolic gesture of the same. And it's either a senior member of the family, male senior member of the family, or usually an uncle, or usually a brother of your father, or a priest themselves that do this piercings. They can involve, and they usually do involve needles, but they can also involve the rods, like very harsh and almost a centimeter in the diameter for the more extreme version of the same. And then when they'll pierce themselves, you can see the little boy holding this little stick of wood. Most of the pierced ones use it. They usually use it to channel the pain into something where they can either communicate to others how much it pains, because it wouldn't break. You can just show how much you're suffering at the very moment by showing how much you strain that little piece of wood, and others would understand how much you pain if they wouldn't understand from your cries. And they usually wouldn't be able to hear you because a lot of loud music and rhythmic drumming, especially rhythmic drumming, is used as well as chanting and singing. So it's a visual that that helps others to understand. When they are all set and pierced, and they all looked at others displayed kavadis that are still sitting on the yard of the temple, then they can start the procession itself. They carry the portable altars on their shoulders. They are up to 3 meters tall, that sometimes, or on average, they usually have about 30 kilograms in weight. We know it because we weighed them. And sometimes I think that the top was almost 60 kilograms, which is quite a lot, because most Mauritians are not that heavily built as Central Europeans, or as you can imagine. The pilgrimage itself is several hours long. It takes through the whole village or a little city or a little town. And throughout it, you walk into a procession. You have a lot of spectators on the side, and you chant and dance. Sometimes a priest stops the procession for an additional chanting and additional singing. A lot of trances happen there. You can see females participating even within the procession, but they are not allowed to have the kavadis. They are not allowed to carry the burdens. They usually use like a jug of milk or a yogurt that they have placed on their head, and they walk with the procession with males as well. You can see a little variance here on the piercing as well, with the body piercing and the back piercing of the guy. And if this works, it works. You can also see a little bells here on the very bottom that are pierced through a little hooks. And you can usually use bells, or you can use lemons or limes or anything that carries a little bit of weight and can be traditionally, conventionally used in the bodily piercings. And they do this whole procession to actually reach the temple mountain. You can see here on the right-hand picture as well the mountain that is looming in the background, and in the middle of it there is a mountain temple which they need to reach. The temple is devoted to a Lord Murugan, so a god Murugan, which is the main supernatural being of Tamil community. The other Hindu communities have other deities as their main deity from the pantheon. And Lord Murugan is a lord of war. It's a god that had been able mythologically to destroy an evil in the world, because he destroyed a demon that was carrying most of the evil things in the world, and he did so by using a spear, and that's why you can see this spear points at the end of many of the needles, because it symbolically carries the meaning towards this spear, and people can understand it that way. And so they start the procession, they walk the procession. It's usually in a dead of a day, and that's really, really hot at the height of summer. Usually they don't wear shoes. You might have heard of some of the punishments that the Taliban is trying to use, which is walking in the sun and without the shoes on the asphalt. It's also something that the pilgrims use themselves. Sometimes they use shoes made of little needles as well, and they try to carry all that weight to the very temple of Murugan, where they will be disposed of all the offerings, and the priest would actually relieve all their struggles by taking the piercings out, putting an ash, and it's a part mixed with the lime and ash from the temple's fires, and you can go home where the celebration will start. So that's basically one thing. An interesting part about the females is that priests have a way of trying if the milk or the yogurt didn't go sour during the pilgrimage, and if it did, which is by no way so weird in the heat, then it might be used as a mark of something being wrong morally within your family or yourself. So it's good that males don't carry that weight. This is how the temple in itself looks like. There are stairs nowadays that lead up to it. It's called Mountain Temple, Kobil Mountain, and it's where they reach the stairs or the summit of the temple, where we were able to actually show that the highest peak of their physical exertion is at the very moment when they finally reached the summit. So I've called this behavior ritual, and I feel like I need to explain what I mean by that. It's a specific type of behavior, ritual behavior, and that type of behavior is widespread across time and space. It can be best defined by its obvious aspects. by behavioral rigidity, repetitiveness, and performativeness. On the more formal note or more formal definition, I'm using this of Roy Rappaport's. Ritual is the performance of more or less invariant sequences of formal acts and utterances, not entirely encoded by the performers. Rappaport can read quite difficult if it's a first reading for you, but I would definitely recommend it for anyone who studies ritual to delve deeply into Roy Rappaport, and especially into the masterpiece of his, The Ritual in the Making of Humanity. So Ritual and Religion in the Making of Humanity, sorry about that. We can get in the discussion on how these specific types actually portray and map onto the Kavadi, at least in my view. Extreme rituals are then a subgroup of rituals. It's that specific subgroup of the ritual behavior that involves painful and traumatic aspects. Probably a working definition as easy as that. It's physically intense cultural practices, significant somatic and sometimes reproductive costs. Can involve, for example, this self-flagellation. Some of us probably recognized Ashura ceremony of Shia Muslims. It can be skin hanging, for example, like on this Makarabarani day in India. It can be scarification. On the left-hand side, it's a Sara tribe from West Africa. The bodily scarification is then a Toposa tribe from South Sudan. But it can be even a lesser cost. Let's say, for example, this facial tattoo of Mari Moko from New Zealand. It can be more costly in our view, for example, like this teeth knocking out ceremony of Aboriginals, specifically Aranda tribe. It can involve exposure to fire, like here in the Shinto festival in Japan, or exposure to ice. You might be more familiar with this than the fire walking. This is an Epiphany ritual in Russia, but we have very close encounters with the specific type of ritual here in Brno as well. They do it in Svratka. Now onto the themes and theories and concepts that we use. So I've been using words like evolution, costs, which might not be that familiar to all of you, or you might think that convey a different meaning for you. So what I mean by costs, I mean costs that are energetic expenditures, material costs that are significant physical and psychological costs. For example, as we've seen in the Kavadi there, they might include even injury or infection. And if you see an activity that's been a long time with us and is that widespread throughout the human species as extreme rituals are, then the lack of obvious benefits poses an evolutionary puzzle. So for anyone that tries to explain why these traits, these activities, which are widespread, and that's an important assumption or important point to make, they need to be widespread, otherwise it might be just noise, or then you're dealing with a behavioral trait, and you need, in any optimization theory or egoistic based theories, you need to find the counter value. So what could be the hidden benefits that might actually be sprouting out of this costly behavior, and therefore keep it in the place. So I'm using, you probably know this from other courses, either that I'm teaching or from reading on your Darwin. So those are what? Yeah, those are Galapagos finches, and you can see the different sizes of the beak that Darwin famously used as a portrayal of the adaptation. So what we do is basically the same thing as trying to explain those differences in the beaks, but we are trying to explain a behavioral trait, not an organ, but a behavioral trait, and we treat it as an organ. So we are trying to see the benefits that would outweigh the costs, and we are trying to see it usually on the increased individual net fitness benefits from that activity. Historically, and it's not that long that that the similar research and our research is existing, it usually tried to find or test for 3 different benefits. The main one is the in-group cooperation. So you would argue that through signaling a commitment to the group's social norms and pro-social norms, you would get a feeling of who really means those norms, and you would be able to avoid freeriders. And if you get a meaning of how much actually is somebody committed to those norms, being somebody more and somebody less, you can try to strategically choose that partner as your cooperative partner for any activity that you are doing within that community. So it improves your assistance during the crises, it improves your economic opportunities. The other benefits are, which are actually very understudied, are mating signaling qualities. So you would be signaling an endurance and, for example, resistance to pathogen as a mate quality signaling. So you would be advertising your qualities to prospective sexual partners within those platforms, within those rituals, for them to find the best genetic material they might want to mate with. And the last one is the one that I'm going to be talking about, and that's direct health benefits. So direct benefits on an individual health that might be a proxy for having more offsprings at the end of your life, basically. So survivor value, we can leave survivor value to the previous benefits. And from our previous ethnographic interviews, we knew that kavadi is usually portrayed by self-reports of the pilgrims as a reciprocal exchange between them and Murugan. So we were delving deeper into those ethnographic interviews, and we learned that most of them, if not almost all of them, were actually connected to health and healing. That's for us, of course, a paradox that we wanted to study, and to determine the adaptive significance of kavadi, we turned into the field experiments in Mauritius. Our hypotheses were mainly 2. First, coming into a field, we knew that nobody usually carries any kind of visible trauma for a long period of time, or we've never seen somebody being so hurt that during the kavadi that they would need a medical assistance, for example. So we hypothesized that the levels of pain and exertion will not have long-term negative physiological effects. And on the contrary, we hypothesized that they will have positive impact on perceived health, so psychological, subjective part of health and of quality of life. What we did was we sampled 2 groups, and here keep in mind that we are going into a field and we are trying to use experimental design in the field, so we need to get some of the controlled environment aside, and it's a constraint that of course this study will forever have. So we sampled 2 groups of participants. We weren't able, as you would never be within those settings, to sample completely randomly. So we've chosen one specific neighborhood and one specific temple, the temple that I've described, the mountain temple. And we've chosen half of people that were going to participate in kavadi and half of the people who aren't going to participate in the kavadi and are going to be just spectators in that event. We went for 20 and 20, I think, in the beginning, and we ended up with 17 in the manipulation and 19 in the control due to life. We can delve into that later. So hopefully the natural setting in itself provided this kind of natural division, and we could only hope that we, in this setting, quasi controlled for other variables that might be otherwise differing if we chose people from different neighborhoods or different temples. So they would be sharing the same belief system, they would be sharing the same kin structure, they would be sharing the same socioeconomic statuses, for example, and the same temple and the same community. We designed a study to take measures before, during, and after Kavadi. It took us 9 weeks. So we've measured on average 23 days before the actual event. You can see here these nice figures. This is an experimental participant, let's say, in the experimental manipulation. This is a control. On the day of the Kavadi, we measured only those who participated, and then we again measured on the post-ritual event in both groups. During those weeks, we obtained several measures. Here you can see what we measured constantly, what we measured daily, and what we measured weekly. On the top side, you can see the devices that we used. We needed to go for something unobtrusive. This is called a SenseWear badge, which provided us with a small enough device that we wouldn't feel like intruding into their cultural practice, so they can easily hide it. It can be wear 24/7. It's put on your left arm, so it will be closer to the heart. And what it can do, and what we used it for, is that it can continuously measure the GSR, so galvanic skin response, as a proxy for stress level. And it can measure the energy expenditures. We will get to those measurements later. It also measures sleep efficiency in a actually quite complex algorithm. Daily, we were also trying to reach then heart rate. So we were traveling to the village back and forth on those days, and we took a daily measurement of heart rate. We also measured their blood pressure and weighed them, but then we don't need to delve into those measurements. They didn't really pay out in any way. And weekly, we also took the self-reported measurements. That's what this is supposed to signify. So standardized questionnaires of self-assessed health and of self-assessed quality of life. Again, if you have any questions of those specific types, we can delve into those later. And we found no substantial differences in any of the physiological measures between conditions. So here I'll spend a little bit more time on the graphs, because I know that it's late in the day and it's not always as quick and easy to read. Blue is experimental, orange is control. And you can see here under A heart rate on the y-axis, in the B, the galvanic skin response on the y-axis, and in the C here, sleep efficiency on the y-axis, while the x-axis has the pre-ritual and post-ritual every single time. So you can see the data points and then no differences in any of those measurements. On the other hand, we observed a significant increase in perceived quality of life and health in the experimental group. So again, if we use the same graphics, so blues are experimentals, orange are control, quality of life, and self-assessed health. You see pre-ritual and post-ritual conditions, and there you can see the differences between the experimental and the control group in the post measurements as opposed to the pre-ritual measurements. When we focused further on the ritual group, so only on the experimental group, as I call them here, we were also interested in the question if the self-reported chronic illness in any way would predict low pain or high pain engagement, as we separated it here into two categories, yes or no. And here you can see the number of piercings on the y-axis from 0 to 400 in your body, and the same on having or not having a chronic illness. We were specifically interested in this question because of our theory behind the anxiety and ritual behavior connection. So it's not every single type of stress that we would hypothesize that spreads your ritualized needs in your life. It's a specific type of stress, and that stress comes out of uncertainty and loss of control. So normal injury wouldn't be the one that causes you not knowing what's going to happen next, what will be next in a couple of months. But chronic illnesses are specifically nicely hitting that part. And there is, as you can see from this graph only, there is a difference, at least a positive trend. So having a chronic illness increase the odds of being in the high pain group by a factor of 10. We were also interested in the question if pain and stress, pain measured by piercings and stress measured by galvanic skin response, would predict the outcome variable on the survey measures, so on the quality of life and health. Here, it's only to show you the difference between a group of low intensity, let's call it. So the low intensity usually involves only one piercing through the cheeks, not even the piercing through the language, only the cheeks and then the cavity. While the high intensity would involve like bodily piercings and the rods, and sometimes they even go for this crazy activity of dragging a small chariots that are like minivans. They need for this activity special hooks that are piercing specific types of your back, so they wouldn't tear from the back. So this is what we distinguish as a low and high intensity. And here on the right hand side, you can see actually a differences in, this is galvanic skin response, and this is the energy expenditure in calories. The green line is, and this is a timeline from 11 to 5 p.m. with 2 p.m. the highest point of reaching the Covell Mountain temple. So you can see that compared to pre and post measurements of the stress levels, as shown in the galvanic skin response, which is the green line, that's the average of normal days, while the red one is on the day of the cavity, and here the same on the caloric expenditure. You can see the differences between the normal day and the cavity day, and those are not a sedentary job people. Like they usually, even though there is a full integrated market within Mauritius, people are used to work the gardens, they are used to work manually, and the manual labor is quite pronounced. Into the effects of the last question, so if the pain and if the exertion had any bearings on the quality of life and self-assessed health, it didn't in the quality of life. So here you can see the low and high intensity and quality of life within pain. And here you can see the same, but plotted on the line. So galvanic skin response and quality of life, also no meaningful difference. But here in the self-assessed health, you can see the significant systematic difference, both in the pain and in the galvanic skin response. To conclude, in many cultural contexts, extreme rituals are paradoxically for us associated with health benefits and healing. And our findings suggest that there is a specific niche of health even within our modern Western science definition of health, that they can, within those contexts, actually, they seem to fulfill that role. How could that be? We suggest two pathways. The first, which, and now I'll just call them analytically, is a bottom-up process. The other is going to be top-down process. So the bottom-up processes is something that I call here a little bit weirdly as a psychophysiological effects of ritual performance. What I mean by it is twofold. First, we know about anxiolytic effects of the behavioral rigidity and repetitiveness and redundancy as well. So there is a, and I would recommend those studies that I marked there that either show that on organisms, when you elevate their stress levels produced by uncertainty, let's say the specific type of stress, uncertainty and loss of control, these organisms tend to ritualize their behavior. So they will increase the rigidity, behavioral rigidity, repetitiveness, and redundancy. And Rich Sosis here in the study tries to look at recitation of Psalms in the Jewish communities in Israel, I think in the Israel-Lebanon war of 2007, and shows nicely how the recitation of Psalms seems to be the spontaneous reaction, culturally embedded spontaneous reaction to a certain stress levels being elevated. So those that were within the reach of the rockets, but not those that just dealt with increased stress levels of situations that they can have any bearings on. So it did increase on those that have no way how to affect the landing of the rocket. And the other part is endocrine alterations. Again, I suggested here one of our studies, but there are also others that try to show that there might be a way via endorphin release and sometimes even endocannabinoids. And that part of research tries to show how pain under certain situations can lead to euphoric states. So there might be a bottom-up process, physiological bottom-up process that will translate into a psychological results as well. The second is something that I would call top-down process, and here I would call it as communicative effects of ritual performance. Again, have in mind that those are just analytical categories and we can discuss them. They might sometimes switch places a little bit, but what I mean here by the road that might lead to explaining our result is through the reputation management and reputation increase. Eleanor Power has shown also on Tamils, but in India, that an enhanced reputation and strengthened bonds actually do increase with the participation in more stressful rituals, let's say. They are a little bit different from for females there. We can discuss that, but we know from other literature that increasing your status is actually highly correlated with increase in your subjective well-being. The other road might be a placebo, of course, something that we didn't really openly discuss yet here, even though it's a well-studied phenomenon, and especially if we study culturally embedded practices, like here, I recommend this article that focuses on placebo. It's from Lancet, even though it's quite old, it's still very much on top of the theory. So placebo could be buffering the stress-induced pressures on the immune system just by boosting your self-perceived fitness, let's say. And the third that I'm going to speculate here is the auto signaling or self-signaling function. Auto signaling is opposed to allo signaling, so signaling to others. And here I want to focus on the role of the communicative effects of the ritual that is auto signaling. So it's signaling of the sender to himself or herself. I use himself because women are not allowed to join in the more extreme versions that we studied at this point. So Zosis nicely and also others discuss how the most important receivers of some of the messages, especially in the rituals of passage or transition or initiation, whatever we want to call it, are the senders themselves. So be it a transition to the adult life or into holy matrimony, you are within that ritual the one that you signal or communicate the message mostly. So you signal to yourself that you are now ready in that state, or to be in that state, even though there is no other obvious outside mark outside of the ceremony. In this respect, it can be a nice self-reference to the past overcoming of pain. So you're signaling to yourself how strong you were if you went through something as painful and you went quite unscathed out of it. You did well. So it's a past reference to your future self, let's say. If you want to read more on this specific research, I would recommend to go into the article itself, and it's in Current Anthropology, yes. And with that, I'm going to close it. Thanks to all the co-authors. I would never be able to do that research without these wonderful people. And thanks to you for your attention. And I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion we are going to have. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so thank you, Radek, for this fascinating talk. And I am sure that there will be a lot of questions. So who want to start?
Thank you. Konrad. Go for it.
Right, a couple of questions. The first one to do with the specific results, and the other one about the sort of general theoretical context. Now, I hope I understood the results correctly, but I gather that basically the difference is in self-report,
Yes.
right? Yes. Now that would seem to me to suggest that it's going to be primarily top-down effects rather than anything else, right? So I was wondering what you'd say about that. The second issue is I really like that you put up the finches, right, with the different beaks, because it really seems to me like different rituals are like different finches, right? And of course, you talked about the different potential benefits that different rituals could have. So then the question becomes, well, what kind of a beak are you looking at when you're looking at a specific ritual? In other words, in the case of the Kavadi, which of the benefits do you think are the most important? And more generally, how the hell do you work it out in general for particular rituals? Which of those benefits are the important ones?
Yep. Thank you. Both excellent questions. And I'm not sure we will have a good answer for all of them. I definitely won't. The first one, you're completely right. The difference was in the self-reports and not in all self-reports, only on the quality, no, only on the self-assessed health, not even on the quality of life, but self-assessed health showed a nice significant difference between pre and post ritual for the experimental group, while no other measurements, our measurements, that's one thing that I need to point out. Our measurements are necessarily very crude one. They are like no clinical study would get away with just this kind of measurements for that physiology. That's one thing. So we might have missed some on the physiology, but we don't have data for that, so we cannot speak to that. If it's then mainly top-down, explanations that would be the most proper. That's a difference in the interpretation. My view would be, yes, I am a lot on the side of placebo and a lot of on the side of auto signaling. So it is something that it wouldn't really carry for you if you didn't hold the belief in that practice. And if you didn't, and I mean it very broadly, so you were brought up to believe, I don't really know how to measure really well if you believe them or not, but you were brought up in them, you consider them as valuable, you live them within your body as well as mind. We need to be embodied in this respect. So yes, I would go for top-down models, but as I mentioned, the categories are analytical and analytical only. So you can always argue that there would be no reputation building without the endocrine alterations. There would be no, let's say, auto signaling without the changes in your body. But we didn't really design the experiment well enough to be able to differentiate between those two. We would need to go further, and that would be great if anyone knows how to. We would need to go deeper and to try to differentiate between those different types. It's certainly possible. It's just that it will take time and resources. What was the other? Finches and the beaks. Thank you for that question as well. Indeed, we look at the religion and ritual as something that we don't really have too much time to delve into, and I don't want to bore you too much, as a complex adaptive system. So it's a whole systemic relationship where there are many feedback loops that you need an energy that comes into the system, which is the ritual part, basically. So that's the most important part. You can have myths that you can read to your children as a bedtime stories, and nobody really believes in them. Nobody really lives them. About a Greek mythology, for example, we can read those myths, but they can be dead as they are, right? While you cannot have a ritual activity without putting an energy into the ritual activity. That's the nice part of the Rappaport definition, that you have to have obvious aspects. You have to have the performance, the physicality, the behavioral rigidity. So that's how the system gets an energy, and through that energy, you can start living those norms and morality, as well as the proximate mechanisms of believing in gods, which is nice way how to stabilize a specific set of norms out of the symbolically myriads that we can live our norms and be still prosocial, but in myriads of ways, and we would never really agree on what's the proper way. Is it monogamy or polygyny? And now we have the belief system that says, no, it's monogamy, polygyny is sinful and bad. So the short answer would be, we look at each ritual and these big platforms like Kavadi as a multi-signaling platforms. As I mentioned, we have nice studies showing how they are being used to communicate and signal your commitment to the norms. We also started to look into how they might be used to show off your mate qualities, so attractiveness, and this is just a little part on the side of where you might be signaling yourself that you're healthy, and through that achieve some kind of health. For example, if any other psychological or clinical help is not available, and that all happens at the same time, that all happens within one day, that all happens to a different receivers. That's something where we also need to learn much more on the psychology of the receivers, not just the senders. So not just how much cost should I use and still be able to stand at the end of the day to be able to persuade you that I'll be a fitting sexual partner, but also how would these costs be perceived? Me paying the cost will be perceived by you as a recipient of that signal. So the again short answer would be I don't know. It would be great there to differentiate between a specific relative strength of those signals. It's something that evolutionary biologists, much bigger names than I would ever imagine, try to solve, like for example, through Peirce and his famous Zorets and pattern. No, I'm looking for a specific formula that enables you to actually differentiate between different types of selection. For example, on that beak. So there are many types of selection, and they all happen at once, and you need to pick the one that actually beat the other selections, and they are a selection against, and then selections force, and unilinear, multilinear. So it would be nice to have this kind of mathematical modeling and a theory that would allow us to differentiate between specific selective pressures or for the beak. Like Kavadi, because it's an extreme ritual, it's different from non-extreme rituals. So you would expect a lot of somatic costs, reproductive costs, but we know that for example, most of our cultural environment got rid of the most extreme rituals. So we have different rituals. We have sitting through a sermon every Sunday or Saturday or Friday, whatever it is for you. And in our cultural settings, because time is very, very important, it is a cost in itself. It's an opportunity cost and time cost, which you can quantify. And you might look at them not as extreme rituals in my definition, but you can see the costs there, and you can see what you might be actually signaling there. For example, I wouldn't expect that you're signaling the pathogen load that you're able to take and still stand at the end of the sermon, but you're basically even for the mate quality, you're signaling your commitment to the family norms that are specific for your tribe. So your commitment to being there for your children 24/7 and for every children, even though you'll have 10, and you'll not reduce the quality of them, even though you go for a high quantity of them. So that there would be signaling even of mate quality within the sermon sitting through. Does that answer a little bit?
It's a conversation.
Anyone else?
Anyone else?
It's close, so I will just take my chance. First of all, amazing work, really impressive. So actually, as you probably know, I'm most interested in the ethnographic part of this work, but do not talk a whole evening. So I will just ask one thing, particularly interesting for me. You mentioned this, that there is, of course, this idea of God who is living there. And so I imagine there is also a mythological corpus or story corpus about this. And usually we just treat these symbolic representations as, you know, they may be causes of something, or they may be some part of motivation, or maybe not. But actually, I am very interested in your opinion. I mean, do you think that these stories, this symbolic corpus, or this may have some motivation for those people to just suffering this? You know, if you're participating in this, you just need good motivation by yourself. And of course, this auto signaling is very interesting and new for me. So I will just try to read more about this. But can you just elaborate on this aspect, if this symbolic aspect is also important in your opinion?
Thank you. Thanks. Very nice question. Thank you. It is. It's very important, and as it might be hard to discern it from one talk of mine, but if you would see several, you would see that you can talk about rituals also on the animal behavior traits. So non-cultured species and species not only that don't have culture, but also non-cultural species have also rituals. or we would call it ritualized behavior, but they don't have cultural rituals, so they don't have the symbolic part. And that symbolic part is super important because, for example, in Kavadi, we treat the needles as a mark of pain that you are able to endure. And it's not random that you can use needles as a show of the pain. Like you would be able to go and just smash your head on the concrete. You would be able to jump into the lake or go to swim with the sharks, which are there. But nobody would take that seriously. Nobody would understand what you're trying to say. The symbolic part, the culturally embedded part, is that the convention actually set it up for you so nicely that you have this culturally ready-made tool through which you can actually show your devotion. So when I use the definition of, what is it? Sorry. When I use the definition of Rappaport, you can see that the part that we are now getting at is that it's the acts and utterances that are not entirely encoded by the performers. And that's the part. So you were born into the system that incultured you that it is okay to use a specific set of needles to show you your at the specific day state how committed you feel towards that Lord Murugan. And you cannot use any other. The convention set it straight that it must be needles, and it nicely showed you the possibility of the variance. You can just use one needle, or you can use the whole bodily piercing. So it constrained you in a way that it told you you must use needles, but it also gave you this possibility of variance for individual signaling. So for me, the motivational part of the question would be, definitely, I would say that there are occasions when a specific set of beliefs can be motivational. In my view, they are very rare. In my view, it's much more common that you use them as a proximate mechanisms. So you use the belief system to actually go for the ultimate goals. So you need to increase your reputational stance. You need to have more people that will share milk with you, that will give you their cow if yours dies, that will sit in and take care of your children if you're sick, and you need to increase that level if we stay within the cooperation signaling. And you have different means provided within the culture, within the community. They are all already symbolic. You can get a higher education, which would then be perceived as having more prestige, and people would like to have you as a cooperative partner just on the basis of you having a title. Or you can use a specific set of beliefs that would convey almost the same message, like he is reliable, he really knows how to behave toward me, and I can see that on his commitment signaling to Lord Murugan, because then he knows what is evil, then he knows what we all consider to be evil, be it polygyny or monogamy, and he also decided to signal that, so it's important for him, for me to see him. That's the proper phrase. Like, it can be motivational, but I myself treat it mostly as a proximate mechanism. Which isn't to say that there might be specific cases where, for example, and one thing I would add is that the reason why I think that is that when we ask people why they do it, they will all give you different answers. Not only that they would differ wildly between like persons, but they would even differ wildly in the different times that you measure one person on this question. So he would answer differently in his 20s, he would answer differently in his 60s. We know this because some anthropologists and ethnographers didn't do their work properly on the anonymization, and we can still use old ethnographies to actually bind them with people. So that leads me to the idea that this is very secondary, usually secondary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is great because, I mean, I totally agree with you. And only one comment that for me, this whole belief system, this symbolic system is actually only for communication purpose, to make meaning for other people watching this, what is going on. I mean, they know, like you said, exactly that this kind of piercing with this kind of needles with which look like arrows, for example, or spear, this is this kind of meaning you should communicate to others. That this is this. So very much thank you for this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this question. And
thank you.
Is there some other question somebody else want to ask? Okay.
Thank you. So I have a question about a particular detail of your description of the ritual, which I know you didn't research this, but it interests me if there are studies on the connection between the effects of loud music, rhythmic drumming, chanting, singing, and the reception of pain management, and also subjective interpretation of pain. Like if people interpret pain, manage and interpret pain differently, where the pain is being suffered in the context of this rhythmic drumming and singing and so on.
Thank you. Thanks you, František. That's also a great question, which I don't have answer to. We didn't study specifically effects of loud music and on the pain receiving qualities. Let's say we studied religious music for different reasons. We studied it because we were interested in if the music in itself can actually change the fairness of your actions. So if you can actually play a religious, culturally embedded religious music with no words, no lyrics, only the music, and you would control for all the speed and the power and all this with the control music, and you would see the effect on the fairness, which showed nice results. Actually, we did it cross-culturally in Japan and Mauritius and Czech Republic and US, and it nicely holds. So people are more fair when listening to religious music. But on the quality that you mentioned, I didn't really read. Sorry about that. I know that, like from the ethnographies and from my gut feeling, I know that they are used in various scenarios that you would need to increase your pain threshold. So definitely I would say yes, because it can just stimulate your endorphin systems really, really fast and really, really high. And we know that endorphin way is a way how to increase pain threshold. So that might be one way why to do it. About the rhythm, we also had other studies that looked into the rhythm and how they basically change for a very short period of time your brain, and how if you're listening to a specific rhythm with another person, if it sets you on a different brain rhythm, let's say, as opposed to somebody that didn't listen to the same rhythm. And we've been able to show that they have then troubles to synchronize between those conditions. So yes, it can do, and it's probably this powerful effect that rhythmic drumming has, and that's probably why it was the first music that ever evolved, and it's still with us, mainly in the ritualized settings, but not only. But I don't have really specifics into the pain threshold. Sorry.
Thank you. Let's make room for Eva.
Thank you. I have actually a comment on that for František. To ethnographic observation from that specific ritual and pain and drumming are that the picture that you saw of the boy being pierced, what you don't see is that directly next to him is a drummer. So you can see that there is some pain still in that boy's eyes, and he's crying, and he definitely feels pain. So it doesn't really annul the pain fully, but it probably helps. And that's from the other observations that most of those performers, let's say, have their support groups. They have their family members and other members who are walking through the procession with them. And those people are usually the ones who sing and chant during the procession. And you can see that they start to sing more intensely at some points. And if you look at the performer, you see that it's the moment that they need it, that they are starting to feel fatigued and in pain. And it seems to sort of help in some way. I wouldn't go into the mechanism of it, but the practice is there. So it seems that's how they use it in a way.
It is basically a practice of people who are exercising, like physically exercising, or athletes, for example. They often listen to loud music, rhythmic music, and it helps them to increase the pain threshold somehow. Or also athletes who are doing like very physically demanding effort, they also report that when, as long as they are even defense of the opposite team, it is better for them to concentrate. It is better for them to stimulate to better performance than when there is no spectator. Like even the opposing team spectators increase your performance. Like.
Thank you. Anybody else want to ask something? Then maybe I will ask a question about the practical concerns doing experimental study in a field, in a culture which is so far from our own weird culture. So how do you, for example, convince the participants to take part in the research?
Thank you. It's great. We should have a hat and just use it like differently in a different position. Great question. It's different for every field. So I can only speak from my experience, and it will in no way be inferential to any other field in the world. So don't take it with a grain of salt. Here we have a great setting for us, which is working in our favor. Mauritius has no population before the arrival of explorers, let's say. So there are no indigenous people there. And then there were waves of settlements, and first, I think Portuguese, and I don't know if even the first weren't those from Holland, and then France, and then British. And it's a fully market integrated economy, and some of them would understand English, so that's one thing that you can usually rely on a gatekeepers and on like the presidents of the temple or priests usually not presidents of the temples would understand your English, and it's usually through them when we try to work with bigger groups of people that we first go through the highest possible reputation person and prestige person there. So that's one thing that plays in our favor. The other one is that they usually see us as an interesting people that are doing interesting things and not really hurting them in any way. So they are usually quite willing to cooperate. We always offer some kind of payment for their time. So it's either in the monetary reward, if that's possible, or it's in some kind of exchange of favors, let's say. So for example, in this study, we could use the machines, the sensor badges come with a software, and they can produce a very nice graphs of your sleeping patterns, for example, or your energy expenditures. And so we were able to offer them, for example, the data being printed out on a nice papers and have them all nicely set up. So that's something interesting for them as well, while they will be willing to cooperate, not only the monetary reward. And I wanted to say another part, which probably I forgot. Yes. So these are they are I would say that they are not that far from our weird cultural status. It would be actually a nice thing to test because there is a nice nice article just out in the PNAS, I think, that uses Mike Muthukrishna's a device that is specifically designed to try to set the cultural distinctiveness and diversity and how further or far you are one culture from another. And my guess would be that it would be nice to actually try it with Mauritius. There would be definitely a lot of data points for that. And I would say that they wouldn't be that different because of the colonial heritage. And that all plays nice in our favor. So they usually are quite chilled, as they usually are in the tropical islands, I would say. So they have, we usually go through the gatekeepers, or we are with them on the streets and just try to snowball on, or get them interested in a half an hour or an hour. Or for this was quite a challenge actually, and that's why we got dropouts, because having somebody to persuade to really strictly wear something 24/7 for 9 weeks is quite challenging, but still you can see that plenty of them did. Is that answering your question? Good.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question for that. With regards to doing research into various aspects of religion and using religious gatekeepers, isn't that going to change the data you get? How do you deal with that issue?
Mm-hmm. Interesting question. We usually try to think about that quite hardly. So if we have any sense that this would actually be bad for the research, for the hypothesis, we try not to do that. So for that you would just need to keep your good relation with the president of the temple. So you would definitely get yourself invited for a dinner and explain to him what you're gonna do, so they wouldn't be upset. But otherwise you wouldn't really have any kind of his formal recommendation. So you wouldn't go door to door then through the village showing some piece of evidence that the president said you should do it. So we wouldn't use that. We would just inform him and ask him a permission, which is not really something you need, but you want to do that. And then you can go around the village and snowball normally off the street, or you use, and that's the one thing I wanted to definitely stress, sorry. We use also a great team of research assistants there in the Mauritius. So if a person doesn't speak the language, because they use a Creole and that's a version, so if a person doesn't speak English or French, they would be able to understand. You need somebody who speaks the language, and that might be a different language for the different Hindu communities or the Muslim communities. So for that, we always use a lot, usually sometimes into 10 people, for example, on the team of research assistants that are able to translate, that are able to back translate all the questionnaires for us, and so we use those two. But it does that was just that I remembered what I wanted to say in regard to sampling. And otherwise, for example, in this, we would always try to keep it blind, let's say, not completely double blind, but you wouldn't need to disclose your hypothesis, for example. You would never have this question from the president, like what is the specific set of hypotheses you have and you want to test, right? They would only be interested in like why, and you could stay on the vague level that you would stay with your participants here. Like you wouldn't lie, you wouldn't mislead them, but you would just describe it in such a vague state that you don't need that. And then you can always but that's for the ethics of you as a researcher. When you finish the research, you can always go back into the community and try to discuss the results with them, and before you publish them, and try to see if they're okay with it, if it in no way portrays them in a bad way, if you're just reporting truth, let's say. Does that answer?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Okay, so I think there is no hand in our online public, so I don't know. Are there any online attendants who wants to ask something? Cameras are off, so I don't know. Maybe I will ask about the women's. Why do you think they are not allowed to undergo these extreme rituals? And do they have any other forms of performing rituals during Kavadi?
Thank you. Great question, and very simple answer: patriarchy. And that's like Hindu society. I can speak only for this specific community, but that's a super patriarchal system, and that would be one way. The others, I'm afraid I didn't include any pictures, and that's my fault, of women. We can see already children being as young as 12 or 10 to be able to participate. That always depends on them, obviously, and hopefully, and on the parents. And then you can see women having a separate procession. They are usually at the back or at the front, but usually at the back. But if they're in the front or back doesn't really matter. Sometimes in the back are the most extreme with the chariots. So it's not really the positioning. It's only that they usually keep to themselves and separated from the more extreme versions. I didn't really look into the self-reports on why they aren't allowed, and that could be quite an insensitive question to ask straightforwardly. So I didn't really get into designing a study that would try to understand their emic explanations why too. You can sometimes see that there is, apart from the checking of the milk, which is one nice power move, there is another one when I remember witnessing a female a woman that get into a trance, and she danced so frantically that she actually dropped the jar of milk, and that was something that really isn't supposed to happen. From my understanding was that it's really something, it's a big no-no, like that's like she got into the trance, but it was obvious that she got really, really upset that that happened, because she's not allowed to finish the procession, and all the others were like the closest family tried to support her, but all the others were just moving away. Like they wouldn't want to have anything to do with that situation, because it just carries so much stigma, it just carries so much wrongdoing that something like that can happen. While I never witnessed a man or male dropping the kavadi or really falling, like not dropping the kavadi and not, sometimes they fall to the ground, but that's not that bad. Like you can just get up. But I've never witnessed what would happen if they dropped the kavadi itself. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you. Is there any last question? We have few more minutes. And okay.
Yeah, I just forgot and now remembered that you also asked if there are other ways how women can participate. It's not from our research, because in Kavadis there are two different occasions, like let's call it big Kavadi and small Kavadi. The big one is done in the middle of the summer, while the small one is done in the middle of winter. And women are supposed to, or are allowed to take part only in the smaller one. So the big one is really for the most extreme versions. And from the studies that I mentioned at the very end from Eleanor Power, 2017, I think here, two from that year, show nicely that there is a specific niche of signaling of women to women. So when they aren't allowed to signal in the extreme forms, they have like lesser in the energy expenditure, let's say, but not in the opportunity cost. So they have special rituals where they can signal as much as males, but they have to do it through the cumulative time costs. And so it usually means that they are praying together, that they have to spend a lot of prayers and like these occasions where they get together and, for example, chant, but it takes on the opportunity costs and time costs. And Eleanor nicely showed that actually if a woman tries to get into the more extreme versions of the signaling, it's not received well within the community of women. It's usually read as a pretension and as something which is outside of the normalcy and the norm. So it wouldn't get you the result you would want out of it. It wouldn't increase your cooperative network. She showed nicely that the opposite is true, actually.
Okay. Okay, sure.
Just, I hope, quick question. I would like to ask about this self-reference questionnaire or what you were asking participants, because actually that was the important outcome of the research. So what was the questions or?
Oh yeah, you mean these two measurements?
Yes.
They are standardized psychological validated measurements on the weird population. So they are the traditional questions, which I really don't remember that well. If you can look it up in the Euro his UL, or it's gonna be in the appendixes of definitely of the study itself, but they are what you would expect, like how well do you feel? Do you sleep at night? Do you have this or that? So
I mean, only of course. So I mean, they were open questions, like they were just telling the
most of them are closed. I think some of them are open, but most of them are closed and they are scaled. And the only thing that we usually have to do is that we need to make sure that they understand the scales. So usually it's us or the research assistants that we need to pre-test this, and every single questionnaire or measurement we need to pre-test. Sometimes you need to allow for non-literacy. So sometimes you need to ask the question and then have some kind of device. Actually, we just found that using tablets works really nice. It's for some reason it's not that hard on the as is pen, for example, on the writing hand, if you've never learned to write. So it's very intuitive. It's very you can, and there are beautiful beautiful apps to collect data in the field on this. So you can play with it. So it's the most intuitive, and you would still get a nice quality, subtle measurements of differences between the scales. So, for example, to explain 1 to 7 is much harder. like on the left-hand side, the negative, on the right-hand side, whatever we are now used to fill in every single questionnaire. That's really hard. So that's something that you struggle every single time. So it's much easier to have the scales being sliders and then just have like visual aids on what it means, for example, for warmth to have the red color and the increasing red, or the blue on the right-hand side, and then let them do this. So that's the only thing that we usually do have to do: the translation, the back translation, and adjusting the scale system for the measurements. But otherwise, we try to keep the standardized measures because they're standardized. That's, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so František, one last question.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I want to follow up regarding the questionnaires. Like the quality of life didn't change that much in some, right? But did you try to follow if there were like some parts of the questionnaire where the quality of life got higher and other that went down, or did you follow like this part of research, like that, you know, possibly the quality of life is pretty much the same, but because something is better and something is worse. So if there is something like that that you got from these questionnaires.
I think that what they do is that they give you like an average composite of the measurements. So you have then the data points here as this person overall scaled on 4 on the quality of life questionnaire as being standardized. And then, as you suggest, you can always go into individual questions and look if they have in any way the bearing. But I'm not sure if we did or if we were in that way interested, because if we want to argue and sell to the community that this measurement actually does something for measuring the self-reported quality of life, we need to take it as a whole. But then for the qualitative studies, definitely it can be interesting. We still have all the data. They will definitely be part of the study, so we can look into it if you have any specific questions, like down to the data. But otherwise, I have no better answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for all of your questions. Thank you, Radek, for your contribution. And I think that now we can switch to other pleasant activities. So I want to invite you to our social evening with dinner, which will take place in Limbo restaurant at Jaselská 200/17 at 6:30 this evening. So thank you very much. And today I think we can end this scientific part of our conference and just go for some drink and meal and everything else.